There are several factors fueling a hunger crisis in parts of Africa. Several countries are on the brink of famine as millions face starvation. Foreign correspondent Debora Patta recently traveled to South Sudan to get a closer look at the situation there and to investigate what's causing these catastrophic conditions. And Debora is joining us now. Debora, so this is really, really interesting. And we've been talking a lot about sort of the ripple effect of what's happening in Ukraine and the impact it's having on countries that were already on the brink. But I'm sure that is just one factor. So let's start in Somalia. The hunger crisis there is affecting many people. How did they get to that point?
In 2022, you have a lethal cocktail of global crises that have contributed to exacerbate an already precarious situation. 4 failed rainy seasons, one after the other, the economic fallout of the COVID pandemic, and then Russia invaded Ukraine. And the world supply chain was disrupted due to Russia's blockade of wheat exports from the Black Sea. And this has led to a dramatic increase in food and fuel prices, which has affected the price of wheat for both Somalia and aid organizations. In some areas, prices have doubled, and aid organizations are having to deal with so many concurrent crises, including aid going to Ukraine, that they just isn't enough money to go around. So now you have 7.1 million Somalis, that's nearly half the population, facing acute hunger. 250,000 of those are facing actual starvation. And of course, amongst the worst affected are children. When families have no food, they're displaced, they move to internal displacement camps, and we are actually seeing children dying of hunger. This is Somalia's worst drought in 4 decades, but as you pointed out, they're not alone. Neighboring countries like Ethiopia and northern Kenya are also dealing with that same drought. Essentially, the Horn of Africa is in crisis, and then in the same region, there is South Sudan, the worst hit country in East Africa, where more than half the country is facing a hunger crisis. Vlad, Anne-Marie?
So, Debora, one of the things that, Anne-Marie and I were talking about earlier this week is how oftentimes in the last 10 or 15 years, we will report on stories on certain countries on the continent starting to do better economically, starting to be able to provide food for their people, to provide an education for their people. And yet, oftentimes, these unforeseen challenges crop up, and countries like South Sudan, like Somalia, find themselves not just taking one step back. Something like this has the potential to make them take multiple steps back and sets back their economy and the welfare of their people
and
for
their stability.
Many, many, many years. So what are the biggest needs right now that you're seeing?
It's at the epicenter of both climate change shocks and the effects of the war in Ukraine. I mean, there's been both flooding in the north and drought in the southeast. Both of those exist. Let's begin with the flooding. This is what it actually looks like in those areas. Take a look at this. It's really difficult to walk here. I've already dropped my phone in the water. Thank goodness it's waterproof. But this gives you an idea of what it's like after years of flooding. The water has not receded, so you see these homes. People used to live here, and they are now submerged underwater. This was their land. They used to cultivate it and live off it, but they can do that no longer. And thousands of people have been displaced. Now, those waters have not receded after more than 3 years of flooding. So nobody is growing food in that area. People are living off water lilies. Can you imagine that? Women would go out every day to collect them, dry them, grind them into some kind of paste. And that's essentially what they are living off. There's not many nutrients in water lilies. Goodness knows what they actually taste like. In other areas, people left their homes for drier land. We went to a nutrition clinic where women would walk for days, in some instances weeks, and we even met one mother who walked for an entire month. It still haunts me, that story. Can you imagine? She walked for an entire month to get food for her child. And in areas like New Fungak and Canal PG, we saw children who were so severely malnourished that they were days away from dying without intervention. So, one bout of diarrhea, one bout of malaria could literally push those children over the edge. And then you go to Kapaweta, where there was drought, no rain. The complete opposite, bizarrely, for at least 18 months. That again means no food is being grown. And worse still, organizations like the World Food Program have been forced to make drastic cuts. They've had they've had to suspend food aid to, I think, nearly a third of the 6.2 million people that they plan to feed in that country. These people that they've suspended aid to are still hungry. It's not that they don't need food. There are just others who need it even more. We met a subsistence farmer who received her last bag of food. It will last 15 days. Then she has nothing. So, as the World Food Program keeps saying, they are taking food from the hungry to feed the starving. And they are too battling mounting global crisis. You've got hunger in Yemen, hunger in Afghanistan, desperate humanitarian aid needed in Ukraine. And as food and fuel prices soar, this is going to affect a place like South Sudan, which has turned that crisis now into a catastrophe. So their needs are massive. There's one bit of good news. They need about $426 million to feed those 6.2 million people. They're still short of that to prevent them from starving. And we just heard and understood that the United States, via USAID, will provide $117 million in additional humanitarian aid to South Sudan. So that'll certainly support the work of the World Food Program. It's still not enough, but it's definitely an incredible step in the right direction.
Debora, as always, we thank you, my friend. Stay safe.